Hello and welcome live to the Dribble Drive podcast, episode 44, as we take a look at the opening weekend of the NCAA Tournament, some Sweet 16 preview, transfer portal, coaching carousel, all sorts of stuff to get to on this lovely Wednesday, March 26th. Austin Render, your host, with you. Dalton Shetler, a little under the weather this week, so we're going to give him the week off. And we're going to power through this thing. We got a lot to talk about here today. As always, a reminder that you can catch us on the Back Home Network YouTube channel, brought to you by Home Field Apparel. Catch us live there. Most of the time, it's Tuesdays at noon. Had to pivot a little bit this week because of sickness and travel, as we were both on the road for the NCAA Tournament. But we're here on a Wednesday this week. Normally, it's going to be Tuesdays. And once we get through the NCAA Tournament, we'll kind of talk through what the offseason is going to look like. We will take a little bit of a step back on the podcast front in the about a month or two after the season ends. We'll talk about that once we get through the tournament. But keep an eye on the Back Home Network YouTube channel for all our episodes live and after the fact on that page. And if you want to listen to us on the go, you can always find us on the Apple and Spotify podcasts. We do put some good effort into some of the visuals that we have. So if you want to see the stuff that we talk about on the show, check us out on the YouTube channel. Let's jump right into it. NCAA tournament action from the opening week. And let's start with the teams that advanced out of the first 2 weeks, which, look, I've been saying for about 2 weeks now. I set the over-under at 3.5 Big Ten teams getting out. If you took the under, you were the winner. 3 Big Ten teams advanced to the Sweet 16. Let's start with the number 1 overall seed. That's UCLA. No issues in their opener against Southern. That was not a big surprise. I think we all expected them to roll there. 84-46 the final. They were tested, though, by the Spiders of Richmond. This game was tied at the half. And give UCLA a lot of credit because you're going to get battled in the NCAA tournament. We know that. And they were tied at 36 at the break. They came out of the half. They won the third quarter 29-7. Lauren Betts having herself a day to remember, 30 points and 14 rebounds. And Kiki Rice, 23 points, 7 assists. And when Kiki Rice, she was 4 of 6 from 3. When she's knocking down 3-point shots, that's when this team becomes really dangerous because we know her ability to get to the basket. But when you have to respect that 3-point game, which she's been so much better at this year than last year, if you have to respect that outside game of Kiki Rice's, it does make you close out a little bit harder. And then she can utilize the shot fake and the drive and can either score for herself or kick it to somebody else who's open. There's so many ways UCLA can beat you. And I just watched them play. And I think there was a moment there in late February, early March, where I saw them lose twice to USC, and the recency bias in my head said, man, I don't know what's going on with UCLA. Like, can they win a national title? Because USC kind of exposed them twice. And I think I might have overreacted. They've only lost to one team the entire year, and despite this game being tied to the half, the second half was total domination by UCLA. And I'm very intrigued by their bracket. They've got NC State, obviously, as their 2 seed. Their matchup coming up is against Ole Miss, the 5 seed. But all of a sudden, you're looking down the road, and I think most of us had circled the Final Four as a potential LA rematch between UCLA and USC. Unfortunately, the happenings down the road in LA on Monday night might change the way that looks. Could be UConn and UCLA matching up. We'll talk about that in a minute, though. Let's talk USC, though, and the unfortunate news for the Trojans. A torn ACL for their star, Juju Watkins, in the first quarter of their second-round win over Mississippi State. She is obviously done for the season. This obviously has so many ramifications. We can talk about it later in the offseason about the ramifications it's likely going to have on next season, because this is a team now that is probably going to be without Juju Watkins again next year. And Kiki Irifen is going to be a top 2 or 3 draft pick of the WNBA draft. So this is obviously going to have big impact on 25-26 USC, but it has some serious impact on 24-25 USC. And this specific NCAA tournament, this is a 1 seed. This is a team that many people had penciled in to at least the Elite Eight, if not the Final Four. A lot of people picking them to win the entire thing on the back of Juju Watkins. This is a total game changer. And it's not to say that USC can't beat Kansas State in the Sweet 16, that they can't go and beat UConn with the talent that they have on this roster. It's built deep. Lindsey Gottlieb is recruited well. This is a really good team. But, man, this is a real gut punch to, I think, the ceiling of USC in this NCAA tournament moving forward. They did easily dispose of Mississippi State. I think there's something to, like, your fallen teammate, let's play for her. And USC was very motivated on their home floor with the crowd behind them. And this was never really a game. They dominated this one from the start. Kiki Iriafen was absolutely terrific. 36 points, 9 rebounds, 16 of 22 from the floor. But this is what's going to separate USC moving forward now. And I think in a different way than it had. We had been saying for a couple of weeks now, look, if Juju Watkins is going to give you 30 to 40 points a game, which is what she was doing there a couple times against UCLA, they did it against the Hoosiers in the Big Ten tournament, against Michigan as well. If she's going to do that, you're probably going to be fine. But on the days where Juju Watkins has an off night, you get the help from the supporting class, from the Talia von Oelhoffens, from the Avery Howells, from the Kaylee Heckles, from Kennedy Smith, and the list goes on. Well, they're going to need now all those people to be even better, because it's not just an off night for Juju Watkins. She's not a part of the game plan anymore. Avery Howell had 18 points, knocked down 4 3-pointers against the Bulldogs. Kaylee Heckle had 13 points. Both of them had 6 assists apiece. It is now going to be a big-time increase of load on these freshmen, Heckle and Howell, coming off the bench. They're going to have to be that much better. Malia Samuels is going to have to play a little bit more. You're going to need more out of Rhea Marshall and Kennedy Smith down low in terms of scoring, because this isn't like they just lost 10, 12 points a game. You lost 25 points a game. You lost an all Big Ten defender. You lost a lot out of this with Juju Watkins. And I'll be very curious to see what USC looks like on Saturday in their opening game of this weekend. And I think if it were going to happen, which obviously none of us wanted this to happen, it is such a bummer for the sport to see the face of the sport go down in this way, in this moment of the season. But for Lindsey Gottlieb and her staff, it at least happened in between the weekends. So at least the only thing going positive in this that you can spin it for USC is that this didn't happen in the Saturday game, and you've got to quickly adjust for a Monday game without Juju. This happened on Monday night. They don't play until Saturday. They've got 5 days here this week to try and game plan around the team that they have heading into Spokane. I thought her speech to her team after the game was spot on. It should never be taken for granted when you advance in the NCAA tournament, when you get to a Sweet 16. This is a USC program that not that long ago was not even making the NCAA tournament. So making sure her team has gratitude for this moment, but everybody's going to have to take a step up. That includes Kiki Iriafen. That is really going to need more out of the freshmen. This is going to be, I think, the game of the weekend right now is USC Kansas State, if not only just to see what this USC team looks like moving forward. But it's such a bummer. There's so many reasons. The selfish ones, obviously, that we just love. We wanted to see some of these matchups coming down the stretch. I mean, who didn't want to see Paige Beckers and UConn against Juju Watkins and USC for a spot in the Final Four for the second straight year? Who didn't want to see that? AZ Fudd. They're playing great, UConn is. USC's playing its best basketball of the year. And to have that taken away is such a bummer. But obviously for her, it's just you hope for a speedy recovery. This will probably mean it's a redshirt year next year for Juju Watkins, and then she'll have the decision to be made. Does she go to the WNBA off the redshirt season, or does she come back to college for one more year? She'll have that option or that choice to make at the end of next season. But obviously for right now, USC is going to have to figure out ways to win without her. And this is going to really test this team and this staff. Big Ten Coach of the Year, Lindsey Gottlieb, will certainly earn that moniker even more if she can turn this thing into a Final Four trip for USC. Biggest winner of the weekend was, no doubt about it, the Maryland Terrapins. They started off by knocking off Norfolk State 82-69. I don't even think this was as close as the score indicated. But game of the year, game of who knows how long. This game against Alabama was grab your popcorn and you can't stop watching. I mean, 111-108, double overtime. Maryland wins. And I'll put my hand up. I stopped watching this game because it was a 17-point Alabama lead, I think 62-45 midway through the third quarter. And I said, okay, I had other things I needed to get done. I said, let's just move on. I think Alabama's going to win this one. And next thing I know, I'm looking through Twitter, and it's in overtime. And so I went back, and the nice thing about YouTube TV feature, not a sponsor, could be, was that when I went back to it, it had resumed where I had left. And so I zipped through the commercials and kind of watched it all happen. And Alabama they didn't really play all that poorly coming down the stretch, but Maryland was unbelievable. It was Cheyenne Sellers doing a lot of the heavy lifting early, keeping her team in it. And then she finished with 28. And Sarah Tibiasu is just money in late game situations. You think back to, obviously, the game winner against Ohio State late in the season and the stones on that shot. And then she steps up with under 10 seconds to go and ties the game up with a three-pointer in regulation. She finished with 26 points, 5 of 7 from long range. She hit a couple of jumpers in the paint as well in the overtime periods. Was just sensational. And Kayleen Schmeichel, who was really good in this game too, she had 24, but she fouled out. And so Sellers and Tibiasu kind of had to do this thing without their running mate in Kayleen Schmeichel. And just so fantastic. Shout out, though. I mean, this was an unbelievable basketball game. A game that just you can't take your eyes off of it. But for Alabama, definitely deserving of a shout out for their efforts is Sarah Ashley Barker. She was just, this was a game that, like we said, it was back and forth, and it was really her because she had a couple of teammates foul out for Alabama. And Sarah Ashley Barker scores 45 points, playing 49 of the 50 minutes in this game, played most of the overtime periods with 4 fouls. And every time they needed a bucket, they went to her. And at the end of regulation, she's fouled with, I think, 7/10 of a second left. Had to make all 3 free throws. I don't know about you, but that is a terrifying situation in my head where I have to go to the free throw line. I got to make 3 in a row on the road to force double overtime. And she didn't hit the rim. Just 3 swooshes, sends it to double OT. Alabama can't quite get it done. But Sarah Ashley Barker, a huge shout out to her and a tip of the cap for her performance. But Maryland moves on. We wondered outside of the 1 seeds what Big Ten teams would move on. Your answer is simply one. It's just Maryland. They sneak by Alabama. They're going to get a shot at the defending national champions next. And the South Carolina Gamecocks in Birmingham coming up this weekend. We'll detail that in a moment. Outside of that, though, 8 Big Ten teams lose and do not get out of that opening weekend. And the highest of those seeds was Ohio State. So they beat Montana State. This was a game that was tight early. It was a little bit back and forth for a quarter or so, maybe the first half, and then Ohio State just kind of pulled away. Very balanced attack. Taylor Theory with 16, McMahon and Gray with 15. Gray knocked down 5 of 8 from 3. We knew this would be tough. Dalton and I both picked in our bracket. We picked Tennessee, and this was tough. Ohio State couldn't keep up with the potent offensive attack of Tennessee. Give the Lady Vols credit. They played great defense. Jelani Cambridge led the way with 19 points, but she turned the ball over 8 times. It's been an issue for her at times this year. But the biggest thing for Ohio State that doomed them in this game, I think it doomed them several times, is they have Cambridge and McMahon who show up pretty much day in and day out for the most part. But when you get this line from Chance Gray, 2 points, 1 of 4 shooting, 0 for 1 from 3. Tennessee took her totally out of the game. Didn't allow her to even get shots up. And when you do that on the outside, the biggest outside threat that Ohio State has is eliminated from the game. Taylor Theory not in double figures. Asia Petty not in double figures. Tennessee did a terrific job defensively. And shout out to Tennessee because Ohio State goes on a 16-0 run of the third quarter. And all the momentum is on the Buckeyes side. And it was interesting because Tennessee calls a timeout and they're on the wrong end of this 16-0 run. And it was asked after the game, a reporter asked Kim Caldwell after the game, like, what did you tell him during that timeout? And she said, I didn't have to say a word. She said, that's one of the great things about this team. I'm paraphrasing here, but she said that they sat down in that huddle and the players just kind of took over. And they figured it out. They win the fourth quarter. They win the game by 15. And impressive performance on the road by Tennessee. It was not a good tournament to be a 4 seed. Maryland was the only one that got through. Every other 4 seed, Kentucky, Ohio State, and Baylor all upset on their home floor. And the Buckeyes, for the second straight season, get to host and don't get out of their own region. So be interesting to see what it looks like for Ohio State moving forward. Obviously, the big news today, which we will get to at the back end of the show, we got plenty of transfer portal and coaching carousel thoughts. But Cody McMahon, hot off the presses, I think about 10 minutes before we went live, it was announced that she is in the transfer portal. That is right away one of maybe the top 3 players available in the transfer portal right now in Cody McMahon. And that is a huge loss for Ohio State. It's going to be a huge gain for somebody who picks up the type of player that she is. So we'll talk about where that leaves Ohio State as we head to the offseason. Let's talk about my Hoosiers here a little bit. An impressive opening round win. Terry Moore has been to 7 tournaments in her time at Indiana, and the Hoosiers are a perfect 7-0 in the first round of all those NCAA tournaments. They did it again here against Utah, 76-68. The Hoosiers have the longest 20-win streak in the Big Ten right now, active at 10 consecutive seasons with 20 or more wins. It had only been done 4 or 5 times before Terry Moore even got to Bloomington, and she's done it now in 10 consecutive seasons. Indiana had only won 1 NCAA tournament game back in the 1980s before Terry Moore got to Bloomington. She has now, as I mentioned, won 7 straight openers. She's gotten this team to several Sweet 16s, including an Elite 8 in 2021. So really impressive stuff from Indiana here. Garzone was good with 17. Chesky was great, 16 points for her. And Indiana won this game without the 3-point shot. I know we're talking about how did Indiana get it done, and their season's over. I get that. But Indiana did such a good job late in the season. I think the USC game, I think the Utah game are the 2 best examples of learning how to win without the 3-point shot. For most of the season, we said Indiana's going to go as the 3-ball goes. And against Utah, they made just 5 of 17, but they found ways to score inside. They had guards back cutting, back screens, good driving to the basket, being aggressive as guards, and that got Indiana this big win. Unfortunately, the draw was that they then had to play South Carolina, who has now knocked Indiana out of the tournament in 2 consecutive seasons. And in 2 consecutive seasons, Indiana has given the Gamecocks all they could handle. This one was the opposite, though, of last year. Last year, South Carolina goes up 17 at the half. They're up 22 in the third, and Indiana charges back to make that a 2-point game. At one point, they lose by 4. This time, Indiana led by 8 in the second quarter. They led by 1 at halftime. I was really impressed. They had the 8-point lead. South Carolina came back, took the lead momentarily there in the second quarter, and Indiana grabbed it back right before the half. Was very impressed by that. But the third quarter just did Indiana in. A 26-14 third quarter for South Carolina. They shot it very well. They punched the ball inside. They got big on the paint points. And Indiana won quarters 1, 2, and 4, a combined 39-38. But that third quarter just did the Hoosiers in. But again, you watch how these teams, some of these 1s and 2s and 3s have played on their home floor, and the way Indiana gave South Carolina a battle. Nobody should be hanging their heads over the effort that Indiana gave. Indiana will be a big talking point coming up here in the transfer portal discussion because they have had 4 bench players already enter the transfer portal. But they fall to South Carolina for the second year in a row. Hat tip to Oregon. They get an opening round win over Vanderbilt, 77-73. I'll put my hand up again. I did not think that Oregon was going to do this. I thought they were kind of limping into the NCAA tournament. I think the week off in between the tournaments might have been the best thing that could have happened for Oregon. They were great here early and almost blew the lead to Vanderbilt. They lost the fourth quarter 24-12, but held Vanderbilt to just 6 points in the fourth quarter. They had a bunch of players foul out, including Michaela Blakes, their star freshman. And Oregon took advantage of that. Deja Kelly, outside of the Indiana game of the Big Ten tournament, she finished this season with incredible numbers, 20 points in both of these NCAA tournament games. Nani Falatea put up 4 3-pointers. She was big. Peyton Scott had 13. The Ducks hit 50% of their 3-pointers in this game, and they win in overtime over Vanderbilt. And again, similar story to the Vandy game. They jump out early on Duke. They've got a 5-point halftime lead. They're up pretty big in the first half, and Duke uses a huge third quarter. And at one point, they went on a 13-1 run. It was a 22-12 third quarter for the Blue Devils, who hold on to win this game by 6. Kelly had 20 again. Philly Che with a double-double. Took advantage of Duke's star post player being out with illness, and Philly Che had a double-double. But Duke finds a way to win. Oregon should be really proud of the way they played, though. This was a really good effort, and it looked like for a while there they were going to pull it off. And it's not easy, again, in the women's game to be the higher seed, having to go on the road in these first-round matchups. And Oregon and Indiana both gave their host schools everything they could handle, but ultimately Oregon bows out in the second round. Michigan had to wait to see who they would play from the first 4. It ended up being Iowa State and Audie Crooks. And we talked about that matchup here, Dalton and I did on the pod, that Michigan was a team that it was going to be interesting to see how they handled this, because Audie Crooks is obviously one of the best posts, not only in the Big 12, but in the country. So how would they handle that matchup without really having a true post themselves? And early in the game, it looked like, okay, Iowa State might just dominate with Audie Crooks. She finished with 28 points, 13 of 18 shooting, and they were up. Iowa State was up 5 at the half, and Michigan outscored them 48-37 to the second half, 27-18 in the fourth quarter, erasing a 3-point deficit at the start of the quarter. Jordan Hobbs, a career-high 28 points, knocked down 5 of 10 3-pointers. Olivia Olsen, Greta Kampschrader, Silas Swords, all in double figures. They didn't get anything off the bench, but they didn't need to with how good their guards played in that starting lineup. And again, this is the counter to, okay, how do you defend Audie Crooks if you don't have a forward on the floor? The counter is, okay, how do you handle Jordan Hobbs when you likely have a forward guarding her? And the answer was not very well. A career high for Jordan Hobbs, who went toe-to-toe, matching Audie Crooks' 28 points. And Michigan gets the win. And look, I called this out last show. This was a tough draw for Michigan, because I had in no world is Notre Dame a 3 seed. None. There should be no world where that exists. And they played like a 1 seed. They probably should have been a 2. I'm not saying they should have been a 1, but they played like a 1 seed in this game against Michigan on Sunday. Just kind of blew them out from the jump, 32-12 after 1 quarter, and stiff-armed them the rest of the way. Olsen and Swords combined for 37, but they didn't get much else from anyone else on the roster. And I still think, and we're going to do like exit interview type of things for all these teams when the tournament's over, but for Michigan, what a season. I mean, a team that was not on the radar for Charlie Cream in the NCAA tournament bracketology back in August. We talked to him. We said, where's Michigan? And he said, I just don't see it. There's too many unknowns. And this team was not like a bubble team. They got in with a 6 seed. They were in with plenty of room to spare. They challenged the top 10 teams all season long. And to be in the NCAA tournament, to win a game in the NCAA tournament for a team that had no expectations. Now, I know Kampschrader and Hobbs are graduating, but that nucleus of the 3 freshmen, Swords, Holloway, and Olsen, I mean, that is as good of a nucleus as anybody is going to return next season in the Big Ten. And if they can hit the portal and find the right post to go with those guards, this could be a team that's totally unlocked next year and becomes a big-time Big Ten title contender next season. I'm excited for it. And if you're a Michigan fan, there's no reason not to be excited for what the future could look like for Kim Barnes or Rico. I think if you would ask Michigan fans in June or July after losing all the players they did, seeing Layla Filia transfer out, and you said, hey, next offseason, you're going to be super excited about where your team is, they might not have believed you. And there were so many uncertainties going into the year. But I know they lose this game to Notre Dame, but Michigan, Dalton tried to kind of give the speech last episode about how just making the NCAA tournament is a big deal. Totally agree with Dalton. Winning an NCAA tournament game is a huge deal. It doesn't matter where you're at. And so for Michigan to take this team to the NCAA tournament, win a game, hats off to Kim Barnes and Rico and the job her and her staff did with this team. Let's talk Dalton Spartans. They do get a win in the NCAA tournament, 64-50 over the Harvard Crimson. They did a pretty good job on Harmony Turner. She had 24 points, but 7 of 22 shooting, 2 of 10 from the floor. Harvard, as a team, shot 28%, 15% from the three, 4 of 26. This was all about the defensive effort of Michigan State. They were terrific, hounding Harvard defensively, making life very difficult in the Crimson. They got a double-double out of Grace Van Sluten, who had a great tournament, pair of double-doubles for her. And again, another team that is trying to establish themselves with a second-year head coach. And it's going to be just like the team we're going to talk about here in a second in Illinois. You're looking for building blocks as a program. Last year, Robin Fralick kind of surprised everybody and got Michigan State into the tournament. They lost the 8-9 game with North Carolina. This year, they come back. They're back in the tournament again, and they win a game this time. That's a step in the right direction. That's a building block, recruiting for those returning, and I think a lot to build around for Michigan State moving forward. But they did run into a buzzsaw in that second-round game. This was a tough one. NC State shot 50% from both the field and the three-point line, 15 of 30 for NC State. They got out and ran on Michigan State. I think that was the big thing. When you can force stops against Michigan State, they can't set up that press as well, and you can quickly get up and down the floor, as opposed to if you're letting Michigan State score, if the ball's going out of bounds and they can set up that press, it can be a lot more difficult. But NC State was getting stops, which led to transition and which led to easy buckets for the Wolfpack, who were out to an 18-point lead after one quarter. They led by 24 at halftime. This game really never was all that close. Shout out to Grace Van Sluten, though, a pair of double-doubles in her tournament. Excited to see what year 2 for her in East Lansing looks like next season. Another team that's like Michigan State, I think, should be really happy with not really happy. I think Michigan State's probably disappointed with the way their season ended, but this Illinois team should be thrilled. They had not had an NCAA tournament win since 2000. So to play a good Creighton team and win it by 9, and a game that Illinois looked pretty good in, with everything that Shauna Green and this staff have had to endure this season with injuries, to get this team off the bubble into the NCAA tournament, win a game, that's really impressive. And Genesis Bryant was great. Adalia McKenzie, Kendall Bostic with another double-double. The second game, obviously, they run into Illinois, and that's a tough one. They struggled to score against the Longhorn defense. This game was kind of over in the third quarter. It got up to 23 by the time the fourth quarter began. It's a little different spot, though, than Michigan. I think for Michigan, they're excited because that nucleus, so those 3 freshmen are coming back next year as sophomores. For Illinois, your nucleus is a lot of 4th and 5th year seniors in McKenzie and Bostic and Bryant and Cook, and they're all gone. So Barry Walls is obviously going to be the big name that comes back next year for Illinois. They've got a great recruiting class coming in, some injured players they hope to get healthy and contribute next year. It'll be a little bit different situation for Illinois, though. They're going to have to retool this thing with all that production leaving. But still, this season could have easily gone off the rails, could have been like last year, another disappointing miss of the NCAA tournament. But Illinois kept fighting. Shout out to the 6 players that just kept grinding for Illinois, because that was pretty much all they had. And they got them not only to the NCAA tournament, but got them a win in the tournament. Impressive stuff from the Illini. How about the Iowa Hawkeyes? I circled this opener against Murray State as one that we might need to keep our eyes on. I tell you what, they were terrific. We thought Murray State would be the team that's racing up and down the floor. Iowa scores 92. Just a terrific performance from the Hawkeyes in this one. Ava Hayden was really good off the bench. I'm excited to see what she's going to be next year in her sophomore season. Lucy Olson, a double-double with 12 points and 12 assists. They knocked down threes, 56% from the floor, and they were really good defensively against Murray State. Murray State was 5 of 30 from three, just 31% from the floor, and Iowa did such a good job just suffocating Murray State. This was a 5-point game late in the second quarter, and they ended the quarter on a 7-0 run to make it 12, and then just lit the place on fire in the second half, running away from Murray State. But unfortunately, the exact opposite thing happened to them against Oklahoma. This was a tight game early, but Oklahoma lit the place on fire. They were really good in this one. The second half, Oklahoma won it 58-31. This was just an 11-point game at halftime. Really got away from Iowa in that second half. Lucy Olson had 20. Kylie Feuerbach had 14. They combined the two of them to go 8 for 14 from three. But everyone else struggled in this one, and Iowa bows out. But again, another situation where you lose Caitlin Clark, the greatest player maybe this game's ever seen, certainly the best player that Iowa has ever seen. You lose several other starters in Gabby Marshall, Kate Martin, Molly Davis, and you retool this thing. And you were looking at a real bleak scene there when Iowa was, I think, 2-5 in the Big Ten, 2-6, and they just went on that big run midway through the Big Ten season all the way through the end into the Big Ten tournament. So a good job by Jan Jansen to adjust midseason, figure out what worked for her team. And I would imagine she's thankful the first year's under her belt, and Iowa's going to be a force to be reckoned with because they have a good group of freshmen that'll be coming back next year. A couple Big Ten teams did not get out of their first games. Nebraska falls to Louisville 63-58. This was back and forth the whole way. The Huskers couldn't quite get across the edge there late. They needed some buckets that they couldn't get. Louisville got the stops they needed late to win that game. Nebraska's in an interesting spot because they obviously have a lot of faith in Britt Prince, and Natalie Potts will come off her ACL injury next year, but Alexis Markowski is gone, so that is a pillar of this program for the last 4 years that they will have to replace. And Washington had to try and stave off a Columbia comeback, and they couldn't do it. Washington led by 13 points at the half, but they lost the second half by 16. And then Washington, another team that really is heavily reliant on the three-point line, 3 of 13 from the three-point line, 23%. They shot well inside the arc, 53% total field goal percentage. But when they aren't making the threes, it leaves them susceptible. They had some chances for the knockout punch. They could never do it. And Columbia, we pointed it out in the pregame or in the preview show last week. They're a 62% free throw shooting team. I think they shot over 80% from the free throw line in this win for Columbia. So shout out to them and their performance there. And they get past Washington in the opening round. So that's where everybody sits after round one. Let's talk a little bit about round two and the matchups that we're excited to see. There's 3 Big Ten teams remaining. Starts tomorrow. Or sorry, not tomorrow, Friday, the first round. So here's the first one. South Carolina at 5 o'clock on Friday will take on the Maryland Terrapins. I got to look at this South Carolina team, and I think they're really good. I think there's the thing about South Carolina is there's so much length to them at the guard positions. They're pesky defensively, but they are, for the first time in maybe a decade, missing that strong post presence. Sanaya Fagan and Chloe Kitts are good, and Joyce Edwards is a really good freshman forward, but the back to the basket post-up options that they've had with Cardoso and Boston and Wilson, they don't really have that right now in Columbia. They still have plenty of ways to beat you, and it starts defensively. They're terrific on the defensive side of the floor. For Maryland, though, the issue for me when I look at Maryland is their defensive numbers are not good. They just gave, I know it was double overtime. They gave up 108 points to Alabama. They gave up 90-some points in both their final 2 games in the regular season and the Big Ten tournament to Ohio State and Michigan. And it's 70.5 a game allowed. It's around 300th in the country for Maryland. they're going to have to be better against South Carolina. They're going to have to make sure that they defend. And I'm just curious how Christina Dulce and Mir McLean and Sailor Poffenbarger, some of these forwards for Maryland, can go up against some of the bigger bodies of South Carolina. I know they don't have the 6'7" forward anymore, but they still have a lot of size. An interesting matchup here. Maryland gets to the free throw line a ton. 22% of their points come from free throws. South Carolina is 7th nationally in opponent free throw rate. So they don't foul. Maryland relies pretty heavily on the free throw line. I'll be very curious to see what will happen moving forward there in that battle of kind of, will Maryland get to the free throw line? Can South Carolina defend them and keep them off the free throw line? That feels like one of the ways Maryland can win this game. Maryland's going to have to get hot from 3-2. Sarah Tibiasu is going to have to be really good. Cheyenne Sellers, Kayleen Schmeichel are going to have to be really solid in this game as well. That goes without saying. UCLA against Ole Miss. That's Friday night in Spokane. The Rebels are coming off an upset win over Baylor in Waco, Texas this past weekend. Ole Miss is not a big three-point shooting team, but they are really good defensively against the three-point shot. They're 5th in the country in opponent three-point rates. They don't give up a ton of three-point looks just in general. They're really good on the offensive glass. They're top 10 in the country with almost 16 offensive rebounds a game. But the struggle for Ole Miss is the defensive glass, and that's where I think UCLA could really take advantage of them. UCLA leads the nation in rebounding rate, grabbing about 59% of rebounds. They obviously have Lauren Betts inside. Janiyah Barker will come off the bench. They've got a lot of size that can hit the glass and can take advantage of those offensive rebounds. I mean, who is Ole Miss going to put up against Lauren Betts? How will they defend her? That's how every team has to try and figure that out when they're facing UCLA. The defensive numbers weigh heavily in UCLA's favor. They allow opponents to shoot 38% from 2, 35% in total. Ole Miss is pretty pedestrian in their defensive numbers. So can UCLA get out and run, take advantage of that? And can they play the better defense and keep this? I think Ole Miss is going to want to get up and down the floor. If this stays lower scoring, though, I think it's at advantage UCLA because I think their defense is better than Ole Miss's is. Final one, I think this is the game of the weekend, unfortunately for the wrong reasons, but it's USC against Kansas State. I think we're all very intrigued to see what this USC team will look like Saturday night in Spokane against Kansas State, who upset Kentucky in overtime in the opening round of the NCAA, or in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Kansas State's a really efficient team, 49% from the floor, that's 5th in the country, 54% from 2, that's 9th in the country, and 39% from 3, that's 2nd best in the country. USC has obviously been really good defensively this year. How will they be able to handle this very efficient Kansas State offense that averages about 80 points a game? Kansas State does not put their opponents at the free throw line a ton. Now, Juju Watkins was sensational at hunting down fouls, getting to the free throw line. Who else can do that now for USC against a team that's pretty good at not putting their opponents at the free throw line? They're top 20 in the country in opponent free throw rate, in fouls per game, and foul rate. They also lead the country in assisted shot rate. So the ball moves around offensively for Kansas State. I think that's what's going to be really interesting, is that USC's been so good defensively this year, but this Kansas State offense is one of the best in the country. So that matchup on that side of the floor is extremely interesting. And if this does become a high-scoring game, can USC keep up? They've lost 25 points a game now by having Juju Watkins out for the year. So if Kansas State gets going and rolling, can USC keep up? Where do they go to get their offense to try and score their 81, 82 points a game that they usually score? That's another big question for this one. So that's coming up this weekend in the NCAA tournament. Really excited for those matchups. Let's talk a little bit about some of the news going on in the Big Ten as we transition out of NCAA tournament conversation. Wisconsin has found their new head coach. Robin Pingeton from Missouri will take over as the head coach at Wisconsin. Pingeton had served as the head coach at Missouri for 15 seasons, 10 postseason appearances there with Mizzou. She was let go recently there in Missouri, but she'll take over as the head coach of Wisconsin. One of the first things she'll have to do is try and see if she can re-recruit some of these people from the Wisconsin lineup that are in the portal, which we'll talk about in a minute. But Sarah Williams, Ronnie Porter, Carter McRae, all in the portal right now for Wisconsin. On the other side of coaching news, Joe McEwen has announced that he will step down and retire at the end of next season. So at the end of the 25-26 season, Joe McEwen will step down as the head coach at Northwestern. He's the all-time winningest coach there in Northwestern women's basketball history. So he'll go one final time through the Big Ten coming up this coming season in Evanston. Minnesota still rolling in the WBIT. They're into the quarterfinals with wins over Toledo and Missouri State. They'll play tomorrow night against Gonzaga in the WBIT quarterfinals. So they are still playing. In the WNIT, Rutgers women's basketball was involved in that as well. They're going to be in the Super 16, as they call it on the WNIT side. They'll take on Charleston. So they are still playing as well. They had a win over Army in the opening round on Sunday, 71-60, or their opening round. They got a bye in the first round, beat Army, and now they'll face Charleston tomorrow night at Jersey Mike's Arena. So a couple of teams not in the NCAA tournament keeping their seasons alive. All right, so as I sit here and I'm about to go into the transfer portal conversation, I am now going to quickly scan through here and see. There's been even more added to the portal since I started this podcast. Another Hoosier as well, by the way. Here's the list that I made at about 11 a.m. this morning that is now outdated because several more have been added. If you're watching us on YouTube, it's small, I know, but here is the small font because there's so many of them on here. I'll read through them for podcast folks. From Indiana, Juliana Lamadola, Lexus Bargesser, Lily Meister. Since I made this graphic, Henna Sandvik and Charnice Curry-Jelks have also entered the portal. So 5 Indiana Hoosiers are in the portal, plus 3 graduating seniors, means that 8 of the 14 players on Indiana's roster will not be coming back next season. Haley Weaver in the portal from Northwestern. Penn State seeing a whole overhaul. Talia Walker, Grace Hall, Allie Campbell, Gracie Merkel, and Mariah Murray are all in the portal out of Happy Valley. Obviously, Ohio State had 1, Faith Carson, but now a second, Cody McMahon. Just before we went live, she has entered the portal. That is a huge name in the transfer portal and will be highly sought after, I would imagine. Purdue is seeing a ton of names. Amaya Reynolds and Mila Reynolds are both in the portal. Jordan Poole, Jayla Smith, Sophie Swanson, Madison Layden, all in the transfer portal. Wisconsin's also seeing a ton. Deanna Semenez, Tessa Grady, Ronnie Porter, Carter McRae, Sarah Williams, Grace Gershek are all in the portal as well. When you see a coaching change, most players will attempt to see what's available in the portal. So it's interesting what's going to happen. I have been asked all day yesterday and continue to get texts today. What's going on with all the portal entries for Indiana? We'll see. It's going to be interesting. I think Indiana knew they already had some holes to fill with Parrish, Moore, McNeil, and Striplin leaving. And now with 5 bench players leaving, here's what you're returning for Indiana as it stands, which is obviously still a fluid situation. But Yarden Garzone expected to come back for her senior season. Shea Chesky would come back as a senior. And then Faith Wiseman, a incoming sophomore now, coming back for her second year. And it's starting to run out of bodies right now for Indiana. If thinking about it, then you've got Lene Beaumont and Sydney Fenn, who didn't play all year. They're both they were both hurt this season. They're coming back. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what Indiana does from here on out. And then Valentina Kavliskova as well, a freshman turning sophomore now. So there's all that's left for Indiana. They're going to have to hit the portal hard. Knew they would already because you're losing your point guard, you're losing your center, you're losing the heart and soul of the team in Sydney Parrish. But this is there's a lot of people wondering what's going on. I'm not worried, because I trust in the coaching staff, but it's a lot of transfers for a team that lost 0 players to the transfer portal last season. Now 5 of them have jumped into the portal here heading into the 25-26 season. Obviously, that is a very fluid situation with all transfer entries right now. They're happening every second, it feels like. Talia Goodman of On3 is a great person to follow on Twitter to keep an eye on what's happening in the transfer portal right now. She's having to continually monitor that because that is an ever-changing situation. But we will obviously address more of those as the offseason approaches, and Dalton and I will have some more details on what teams are picking up transfers, what teams are losing transfers, and obviously, like we did last year, we'll do those team by team previews when we get into kind of July-ish area. We'll go through all 18 teams and preview what's coming up for them in the next season. But there's still 3 teams playing in the NCAA tournament, still 2 more teams in Rutgers and Minnesota playing in other postseason events. So a lot still going on around the Big Ten Conference. Again, Maryland, South Carolina is 5 o'clock on Friday. UCLA Ole Miss is 10 o'clock on Friday, and USC Kansas State is 8 o'clock on Saturday. Excited to see what all those Big Ten teams can do in the remainder of the NCAA tournament. Thanks for joining us on episode 44 of the Dribble Drive. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on the Back Home Network YouTube channel, brought to you by Home Field Apparel. Also, give us a download on Apple and Spotify podcast if your preferred way is the audio form. I love listening to podcasts when I go on walks and long drives, so we understand that as well. If you miss us live, you can always catch us after the fact on YouTube and in those podcast locations. Thank you all for making this a lot of fun. We've had good live numbers here today. We've had great download numbers throughout the season. Tell a friend. Let them know we're still rolling here as the season continues to move along. Hopefully, Dalton will be feeling better for next week's show. And hopefully, we'll be talking about at least one Big Ten team, if not more, getting ready for the Final Four. We'll talk about more basketball next Tuesday. Until then, I'm Austin Renner saying so long from the Dribble Drive. Enjoy another great weekend of basketball. We'll talk to you guys next week for episode 45.